There's a reason the darkest thoughts often surface during the brightest season, a reason why silence feels heavier in December nights, why lights glow but shadows seem deeper, why joy feels rehearsed and memories ache sharper than usual. And it begins with a question nobody ever asks out loud. Why does a holiday meant to celebrate warmth feel so cold to so many people? Why does a season built on light historically demand darkness first? And why were you never taught what Christmas was before it became gentle, sanitized, and safe? Because long before wrapped gifts and smiling faces, this time of year was feared, endured, and survived rather than celebrated. And if you listen closely to the quiet beneath the music and the laughter, you can still hear it breathing. The older Christmas, the one that demanded sacrifice, obedience, and silence, the one that arrived not with joy but with dread as the sun disappeared earlier each day and people wondered if it would ever return. Because winter was not romantic to ancient minds, it was a slow extinction. Crops failed, animals died, hunger crept in, and darkness ruled most hours of the day. And so this season was not about happiness, but control, about rituals designed to force the world back into order. And the first unsettling truth is that Christmas did not begin as a celebration of life, but as a negotiation with death. A desperate attempt to survive the longest nights of the year by appeasing forces no one understood. And if that makes you uncomfortable, it should, because the holiday you know was built on layers of fear carefully buried under centuries of tradition. And the further back you go, the more disturbing the questions become, like why so many early winter rituals involved blood, why children were once central to these rites, why rewards and punishments became inseparable from the season, and why stories meant to comfort were originally designed to terrify obedience into the young and vulnerable. Because Christmas was never just about generosity, it was about surveillance, judgment, and consequence. Long before a cheerful man in red watched you while you slept, there were darker figures said to roam villages during the longest nights, watching, listening, deciding who deserved survival and who did not. And these were not metaphors. People believed them with a certainty that shaped behavior, altered parenting, and justified cruelty. And that belief still echoes today in ways you may feel without understanding, especially when expectations feel heavy and joy feels mandatory, because enforced happiness has always been part of the ritual, and enforced emotion is one of the oldest tools of control, which raises another question nobody ever asks. Who benefits when everyone is told they must feel joy at the same time? And what happens to those who do not? Because historically, those people were labeled cursed, sinful, ungrateful, or dangerous. And the pressure to perform happiness was not social, it was spiritual. Failing to participate fully in the season was once seen as inviting misfortune upon the entire community. And so fear disguised itself as tradition, and tradition disguised itself as love. And generation by generation, the original meaning blurred, leaving behind a hollow shell filled with obligation, repetition, and guilt. And yet fragments of the original darkness remain embedded in symbols we still use without question, like evergreen trees brought indoors not as decoration, but as talismans against death, lights strung everywhere to mimic the sun in hopes it would return, feasts held not for abundance, but because famine was expected, and gifts given not out of kindness, but as appeasement, offerings meant to ensure protection through the winter. And once you see this, it becomes harder to unsee the unease beneath the surface, the way Christmas stories often revolve around loss before redemption, loneliness before warmth, ghosts before forgiveness, and how even modern narratives cannot escape the pattern, because psychologically, the season has always been about confronting absence, not celebrating presence, and the human mind remembers this even when history does not, which is why depression spikes during this time of year, why anxiety intensifies, why memories resurface uninvited, because the body remembers winter as a time of vulnerability, and culture has simply painted over that memory with lights and songs. But paint does not erase what lies underneath. it only hides it temporarily. And when the noise fades late at night, when the decorations are turned off and the house is quiet, that older awareness creeps back in, whispering that something is wrong, that this season demands something from you, something emotional, something internal, something you may not have the energy to give. And this demand is not new, it is ancient, rooted in centuries of belief that winter requires payment, that survival must be earned, and joy must be justified, which leads to a final, unsettling thought that lingers like a shadow at the edge of the room. If Christmas was never meant to be comforting, if it was originally designed to manage fear, obedience, and survival, then what exactly are we participating in now, and whose rules are we still following without realizing it? Because the origins of Christmas are not lost, they are simply hidden, deliberately hidden, carefully edited, and the deeper you go, the more you begin to sense that this holiday did not forget its past, it just learned how to smile over it. And the most disturbing part is not what has been erased, but what has been preserved quietly, waiting beneath the surface, ready to reveal itself once the story truly begins. Long before carols and twinkling lights, long before the sanitized images of Santa Claus filled storybooks, Christmas was a patchwork of histories that were deliberately hidden, rewritten, or forgotten, because the story that most people are told is a polite fiction designed to comfort rather than reveal. And if you trace the timeline far enough, you discover that many of the rituals we now consider innocent were once steeped in fear, punishment, and control. Like the Yule traditions of Northern Europe, where villagers would leave offerings outside doors, not for luck, but to placate unseen spirits that were believed to roam freely, demanding attention and sacrifice. And those who failed to give properly risked misfortune, illness, or even death. And yet, centuries later, these practices became holiday cheer, reduced to quaint tales about cookies for Santa or stockings hung on the mantle. And the erasure is deliberate because hidden history is powerful. It shapes identity and loyalty. It tells us who belongs and who does not. And few realize that the December 25th celebration was chosen not because of Jesus' birth, but because of pre-existing pagan festivals that celebrated the winter solstice, marking the moment when the sun's return promised survival after the harshest part of the year. And these festivals themselves were often violent, featuring ritualistic sacrifices, communal feasts where the weak and infirm were left out, and dark myths about the consequences of angering gods who governed life and death. And over time, the Christian church absorbed these rituals, sanitizing some while ignoring others, layering new meanings over old ones, yet never completely erasing the psychological footprint of fear and obedience, which explains why medieval records mention families trembling at Christmastide, performing prayers not from devotion, but from anxiety, terrified of wrath or misfortune visiting the household. And if you dig deeper, you find that many traditions of caroling, wassailing, and gift-giving originated as forms of social inspection, ways for communities to monitor each other under the guise of celebration, ensuring compliance, generosity, and conformity, with the risk of shame or punishment looming for those who failed. And these layers of hidden history continue to ripple into modern culture, influencing everything from advertising and the commercialization of Christmas to the subtle anxieties people feel when they don't meet seasonal expectations. Because the stories we are told today are a carefully constructed version of reality, hiding the darker, more complicated truths beneath cheerful veneers. And if you wander into the archives of history, you encounter accounts of rulers who used Christmas time as a tool to consolidate power, enforcing attendance at Mass, dictating feasts, and sometimes punishing those who resisted. And in every era, these practices reinforced hierarchy, obedience, and fear, teaching people to participate in rituals they barely understood, much like they do now, only now the fear is internalized, psychological rather than physical, a ghost of authority that whispers insistently, making people question whether they are doing enough, giving enough, being enough. And this demand is not new, it is ancient, rooted in centuries of belief that winter requires payment, that survival must be earned, and joy must be justified, which leads to a final, unsettling thought that lingers like a shadow at the edge of the room. If Christmas was never meant to be comforting, if it was originally designed to manage fear, obedience, and survival, then what exactly are we participating in now? And whose rules are we still following without realizing it? Because the origins of Christmas are not lost, they are simply hidden, deliberately hidden, carefully edited, and the deeper you go, the more you begin to sense that this holiday did not forget its past. It just learned how to smile over it. And the most disturbing part is not what has been erased, but what has been preserved quietly, waiting beneath the surface, ready to reveal itself once the story truly begins. Long before carols and twinkling lights, long before the sanitized images of Santa Claus filled storybooks, Christmas was a patchwork of histories that were deliberately hidden, rewritten, or forgotten. Because the story that most people are told is a polite fiction designed to comfort rather than reveal. And if you trace the timeline far enough, you discover that many of the rituals we now consider innocent were once steeped in fear, punishment, and control. Like the Yule traditions of Northern Europe, where villagers would leave offerings outside doors, not for luck, but to placate unseen spirits that were believed to roam freely, demanding it. Long before the cheerful songs and candy canes, Christmas carried rituals that would strike the modern mind as grotesque, bizarre, and terrifying. Because beneath the holly and mistletoe lies a history of practices designed to enforce morality, punish transgression, and instill fear. And some of these customs persist, twisted and barely recognized, in forms we consider playful. But their original intent was far from innocent. Like the Krampus of Alpine folklore, a horned, demonic figure who would beat, frighten, or even abduct misbehaving children, a living warning that joy comes with compliance. And in England, the early Christmas season often involved mumming and masked performances that were not only celebrations, but public tests of courage and social rank, where humiliation and physical trials were integral. And in some regions, young men would engage in rough and dangerous games that mimicked hunting or combat, designed to demonstrate bravery and endurance under cold, punishing conditions, while women were often subjected to rituals of courtship and scrutiny that were simultaneously festive and coercive, revealing the deeply patriarchal and ritualized nature of these celebrations. And if you think these are distant or exaggerated myths, consider the historical records of Norway and Iceland, where during Yule, families would carve effigies, leave food offerings for spirits, and in some cases conduct human sacrifices to ensure prosperity. Rituals justified as necessary for survival rather than superstition. And while these acts seem unthinkable now, they reflect a logic embedded in the psyche of societies facing long winters and scarce resources, where the line between belief, fear, and necessity blurred. And some of these practices mutated over time into symbolic or dramatized forms, like hanging stockings, leaving treats for supernatural beings, or the depiction of Santa Claus as both rewarder and surveillant. And in Germany, the tradition of the Christkind, or the Advent calendar, also had undertones of moral judgment, with images designed to remind children of virtue and sin. And these traditions carried psychological weight, teaching obedience through fear, embedding the duality of reward and punishment into the earliest holiday experiences. And even feasting, which seems celebratory, carried an undercurrent of social tension, with strict rules about hierarchy, propriety, and who would receive what. Because every action in these rituals had consequences, and the stakes were often survival itself, which explains why the season has historically been as much about anxiety as it is about warmth. And if you look closely, you notice echoes of these older customs in modern celebrations: the need to perform happiness perfectly, the anxiety over gifts and appearances, the pressure to adhere to rituals, all faint shadows of these ancient tests of character. And if you trace symbolism in decorations, you find layers of hidden meaning. Mistletoe was once thought to ward off evil, but also represented fertility and power dynamics. Candles were not only lights, but markers of life and death. Bells were protective, not musical. And yet today, these elements are sweetened, softening the tension, while the original psychological and cultural lessons remain embedded like invisible wires, still influencing behavior and emotional responses, which leads to the unsettling notion that Christmas is a season built on a duality of pleasure and terror, a carefully balanced dance between comfort and unease. And understanding this duality forces you to see the holiday in a way that few ever consider, not just as a time of cheer, but as a living cultural artifact shaped by centuries of control, survival, and psychological conditioning. A truth that quietly demands reflection even as we hang lights and wrap gifts, because these dark traditions were never fully erased, merely adapted, and they continue to echo, faint but persistent, beneath the songs and laughter, waiting to remind us that the season has always been more than it appears. The psychological imprint of these long-forgotten and often terrifying traditions is visible in ways we scarcely recognize, because Christmas has always been a mirror reflecting our fears, desires, and social conditioning. And though modern celebrations are dominated by warmth, generosity, and family, the undercurrent of anxiety, obligation, and performance persists, subtly shaping behavior and emotional responses, from the tension felt when buying the perfect gift to the unspoken dread of failing to create the ideal holiday environment. And this is no coincidence, because the human brain retains ancient patterns, and rituals that once ensured survival through compliance, sacrifice, and social harmony now surface as stress, guilt, and pressure, particularly during December, when cultural cues trigger memory systems linked to scarcity, social evaluation, and moral obligation. And in families, these subconscious echoes create cycles of tension and expectation, often leaving adults exhausted and children wary, mirroring the original functions of the older rites. And anthropologists and psychologists note that holidays like Christmas act as both cultural reinforcement and emotional conditioning, embedding communal norms through repetition, sensory cues, and storytelling, while also creating a heightened awareness of moral and social boundaries. And the presence of joy alongside anxiety is no accident. It is a psychological design inherited from centuries of winter rituals, where survival depended on obedience, attentiveness, and careful participation. And the human mind never forgets such patterns, even as they mutate over generations, which is why so many experience nostalgia tinged with unease, melancholy hidden beneath cheer, and an inexplicable emotional weight. And if you examine media, advertising, and literature, you see the continued layering of these pressures, subtle nudges reinforcing idealized behaviors, encouraging conformity, monitoring generosity, and silently perpetuating the original blend of reward and fear. And though consciously we interpret this as tradition or culture, psychologically it resonates with a far older template, creating tension between authenticity and expectation, desire and obligation, happiness and fear. And even neuroscience confirms this, showing how ritual, repetition, and symbolic cues activate brain regions associated with both reward and threat, which explains why emotional responses during Christmas are so intense and polarized, why memories from this season are often vivid, and why even small deviations from expected behavior can create disproportionate anxiety. And when you consider this, it becomes clear that Christmas functions not only as a holiday, but is also a psychological experiment, unconsciously reinforcing social norms, internalized morality, and emotional regulation, echoing patterns established hundreds of years ago. And the unsettling truth is that the comfort we associate with Christmas is inseparable from the tension it generates, a duality woven into every light, song, and tradition, quietly shaping behavior across generations, ensuring that even in modern times, this holiday remains a delicate dance of emotional control and subconscious compliance, a haunting legacy that is often invisible but deeply felt, reminding us that the past is never truly gone, and the shadows of ancient rituals linger quietly behind every cheerful display. And so, when the season comes to its emotional and philosophical conclusion, what remains is not only joy, not only nostalgia, not only stress, but a profound mirror of human experience, reflecting centuries of survival, fear, adaptation, and hope. Because Christmas is more than a holiday, it is a living narrative of human resilience, a story in which light and darkness have always danced together, teaching lessons through ritual, repetition, and symbolism that transcend time. And understanding the hidden history reframes every familiar scene, every candlelit dinner, every gift exchanged, showing that beneath the comfort lies a tapestry woven with both fear and care. That every tradition, no matter how benign it appears, carries the weight of generations, reminding us that cultural memory is powerful and persistent. And this awareness brings an emotional clarity. Joy is not meaningless. It is a conscious choice layered over inherited caution, fear, and respect. A fragile but persistent assertion of life over darkness, a way to honor ancestors who endured long nights, harsh winters, and dangerous superstitions. And even modern anxieties, the tensions we feel during the holiday, the stress, the melancholy, are not failures, but echoes, a living connection to human history. And to engage with them is to participate fully in the human story, to recognize that happiness is not merely an emotion, but a deliberate act layered atop centuries of challenge. And that recognition transforms every aspect of the season, making lights brighter, music deeper, and gatherings richer. Because when you see the shadows, you also understand the light, and the contrast gives meaning to warmth, laughter, and generosity. And finally, as the candle burns down, as the last gift is opened, and as the night deepens, the philosophical realization settles in quietly. Christmas is not a surface celebration, it is an emotional journey, a negotiation with the past, and a conscious claim of joy over fear. And it invites us to participate